We're the ones who failed to save the children. We're the ones they've been called to over and over again.
This place wants us scared. It wants us fighting each other instead of fighting back. We stand together, we stay focused, and we keep fighting until we find a way out.
This naturally pulls us back toward Christopher, someone we still know surprisingly little about despite how much his story shapes everything happening in the present. We know Christopher changed into something else. We know the boy in white tried desperately to guide him somewhere. We know something absolutely terrible happened to him afterward. But what if we've been asking the wrong question about him this entire time? Instead of asking why Christopher ultimately failed, maybe the better question is what he almost succeeded in doing before everything fell apart. Because every single cycle in this town seems to get a little closer to uncovering the truth right before it collapses completely. Christopher may have actually discovered something that genuinely frightened whatever force is controlling this town, and that could explain exactly why everything around him fell apart so suddenly and so violently. The evil presence controlling this place doesn't just simply kill the people who live there. It destroys hope itself the exact moment someone gets dangerously close to breaking the cycle for good. And once you start looking for this pattern, you see it constantly throughout the entire series. Boyd finally finds real answers and immediately afterward loses someone he deeply loves. Tabitha manages to escape the town, only to be violently pulled right back into it. Jade uncovers another piece of the puzzle, but every single answer he finds seems to create two brand new mysteries in its place. Even Victor manages to remember something genuinely important, only for another crucial memory to slip away from him at the exact same time. The pattern never actually changes no matter which character it happens to. Progress is always immediately followed by tragedy, almost as if the town itself is actively correcting itself every single time someone gets too close to the truth, hiding underneath it all. Now think carefully about the faraway trees, because they might be far more important to this entire mystery than simple portals connecting different places together. Christopher was told to free the children trapped in this town. Jade now appears to be following that exact same impossible path. We were told the children poured all of their hope directly into the roots beneath the ground, and those roots eventually became the faraway trees that connect everything. That line might sound almost poetic on the surface, but what if it's actually describing exactly how this entire town functions underneath everything we see? Roots connect everything happening beneath the surface, completely invisible to anyone standing above ground. Trees might appear in wildly different places across the map, but underground, they all secretly belong to the exact same network. What if memories inside this town work in exactly the same hidden way? Every single cycle grows upward like its own separate tree, looking completely distinct from the outside, but underneath the ground they all share the exact same roots connecting them together. That single idea would explain why certain characters seem to inherit visions from previous lives that were never technically their own. It would explain why Victor remembers things that nobody else around him seems to remember at all. It would explain why Jade keeps seeing symbols that clearly existed long before he ever arrived in this town. And most importantly, it would finally explain why Episode 1 keeps circling back again and again to this powerful idea of remembering. The roots running beneath this entire town were never only physical roots. They are memories quietly connecting every single generation together underneath the surface. Nobody arriving in this town is ever truly starting completely from the beginning. They are simply stepping directly into a story that already existed long before they were ever born into it. Then there's Julie. And there's a strong chance Season 5 is going to turn her into one of the single most important characters across the entire series. The Season 4 finale leaves behind several important hints suggesting her personal journey is far from finished, especially once you consider everything we learned about story walking throughout that season. John Griffin even suggested there's a meaningful difference between actively changing the past and simply realizing you were always a part of it from the very beginning. That single idea genuinely changes everything about how this show works. Most time travel stories on television are built entirely around characters altering history to create a better outcome. But From might be doing the complete opposite of that familiar formula. History never actually changes in this story, because the characters themselves are the exact reason it happened the way it did in the first place. We've already seen this play out clearly with Boyd down in the dungeon. Julie throws him the rope not because she suddenly decided to help him in that moment, but because she was always destined to throw him that exact rope from the very beginning. That single event doesn't create some brand new alternate timeline branching off. It simply completes the timeline that already existed the entire time. So imagine exactly how far this powerful idea could stretch once Season 5 actually begins. What if Julie eventually becomes the very person who first tells the children the legendary story they later pass down through generations? What if she turns out to be the mysterious voice responsible for starting this entire legend in the first place? What if the answers every single survivor has been desperately searching for were actually given to them by someone who technically hadn't even been born yet at the time? It sounds completely impossible on the surface, but From has quietly been preparing us for exactly this kind of paradox ever since it first introduced us to that dungeon. And suddenly, John Griffin's original statement becomes even more fascinating to think about. The answers were sitting there in episode 1 because the ending had technically already happened long before the beginning ever did. There's one final detail that keeps nagging at me, and I genuinely don't believe it's an accident placed there by chance. This show constantly repeats the language and imagery of games throughout every single season. We repeatedly see chess being played on screen. We repeatedly hear characters casually talking about rules that seemingly must be followed. We repeatedly hear the specific phrase "endgame" used in conversation. Even the relationship between fathers and their sons throughout this series is frequently presented almost like some kind of ongoing competition, rather than a simple, loving family bond. Kenny and his father sit down and play chess together. The boy in white almost seems to be quietly challenging the man in yellow without ever directly confronting him in open conflict. Boyd constantly feels like someone unseen is deliberately testing him rather than simply attacking him outright. What if this entire town is actually operating like one massive game complete with fixed, unbreakable rules underneath the surface? The monsters clearly follow specific patterns throughout every season. They only ever come out after dark. They rely on tempting their victims instead of simply rushing straight toward them. The talismans scattered throughout town create very specific boundaries that absolutely cannot be ignored under any circumstances. Every single rule in this world feels completely deliberate, almost as if someone intentionally designed this entire place long before the current group of survivors ever arrived here by accident. And if that theory turns out to be true, then episode 1 was never simply showing us random horror happening to an unlucky family. It was actually showing us the opening move of a much larger game that has already been played out many, many times before by countless people who came here long before them. The real question was never about who eventually wins this game. The real question has always been whether this particular generation of survivors can finally learn the rules well enough to stop repeating the exact same losing match over and over again. And I genuinely believe that is precisely where Season 5 is about to take us. All of this leads directly to one final question that I simply cannot stop thinking about long after finishing that finale. If Episode 1 truly does contain most of the answers just like John Griffin promised us, then what exactly is the single lesson this pilot keeps repeating from its very first scene all the way through to its very last one? For me